again, welcome to our Q&A. Thank you for joining us during the service, but also now waiting to partake of the Q&A. We answer questions on the sermon that you just heard, answer questions on City Church, anything about City Church, and also questions on Christianity in general. And so we won't take as many questions. There are no silly questions, but there are some unanswerable questions. Like, honestly, there are some questions that we may not be able to answer, but we'll do our best to stab at everything. And so what you can do is just type your question if you're viewing from YouTube or Facebook in the comment section. Well, in YouTube is the live chat. Facebook comment section, Mixler, the comment section as well. So love to take it. My name is Femi Oshunwe. I'm lead pastor of City Church. Okay. I should say, while you're here, you've heard it too many times, but I'd love for you to subscribe. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Follow us on Instagram. Follow us on Facebook, on Twitter, and on Mixler. Okay? While you're at it, let me check for questions. Okay, I've seen one question on YouTube. I don't know if... what's the WhatsApp? Okay. The WhatsApp number is on it should be there. I can't see it on the live chat. But if you come out of the live chat, you probably will see it. All right, so Hadiza sends in a question. And Hadiza says, good morning. My question is on forgiveness. Is forgiveness after retaliation or humiliation valid? It's a case of a cheating spouse humiliated and beaten. Even then afterwards, it's a case of a cheating spouse humiliated and beaten, even then afterwards forgiven. I'm not sure I get the second part of the question. I know you're talking about a cheating spouse, but what I'm not sure now of okay, the cheating spouse was humiliated, but is it the person, the cheated on spouse was humiliated, but is it the cheated on spouse that then went and inflicted the beating? So I'm not quite sure about but I think I get the first part of the question, which is, if someone retaliates after they've been cheated on, can that person still forgive? Like, is it even valid? So let's say A and B were married. A cheated on B, so B has been humiliated. And then B somewhat retaliates. Then B then tries to forgive A. Like, no, you've had your pound of flesh. So what are you trying to forgive me for? Yeah, it's a nice question, Hadiza. If that's the way, and please correct me if I'm not understanding the question. I would say this, as you know, we've been going through this 1 Peter, and Peter says, don't repay evil with. Well, Paul says, don't repay evil with evil, but Peter says that we should try to remember the exact phrasing of it, but that we repay evil with good, essentially. And so what happens when we repay evil with evil? Well, if we do that, then the person who has retaliated needs forgiveness too. I don't think things are solved. Relationships are not repaired by, do me, I do you, God no go vex. You know, I've done yours, done mine, so now let's continue. No, I don't think. Both of them have been hurt. And both of them have sinned against God. So both of them require forgiveness. Both of them require forgiveness against God. Both the person who committed the adultery and then the person who then retaliated. Now, how did they retaliate? I hope if the retaliation is, I don't know. Sadly, I know somebody who murdered her husband here in Lagos. And the husband was a brother to someone that I know. Because her husband allegedly was constantly a philanderer, he was constantly sleeping around and he was just humiliating her. So that's one form of retaliation. Does a person retaliate through sleeping with other people as well? So both of them require forgiveness from God because they both sinned against God. But now, because if you retaliate by sleeping with somebody else because your spouse slept with somebody else, you also owe that spouse needs to forgive you. Yes, you were not the one who started it. but actually you did something that was wrong to them. The fact that they violated the sacred vow to you doesn't make you violating the sacred vow to them as well. So once you do that, you also need forgiveness from them. So I would say, yes, you can still forgive. You can still forgive them because they violated something against you. But once you have retaliated, you also require their forgiveness as well. Okay? Hope that helps. Let's see. Demola Badma said, I'm used to hearing 1 Peter 5:6 quoted in different contexts, promotion, prosperity, etc. But within this preach context, I want clarification. What does lift you up in due time really mean? So don't forget. So let me read 1 Peter 5:6 again. Humble yourselves, therefore, under God's mighty hand, that he may lift you up in due season. Then it says, cast all your anxiety on him because he cares for you. Let's not forget the context that we're the theme of suffering, as you can tell, is permeating throughout this whole book. Even here in 1 Peter 1, Peter talks about himself as a witness to Christ's sufferings. So it's permeated throughout the whole book. Why? Because the letter was written to people who were suffering. And don't forget that the Bible is many of the books in the Bible are written to people. They're not written to us, but they're written for us. So we apply it based on the fact that we first understand how it's written to the people that it's written. And so it was written to people who were in suffering. And that, in a large sense, they were down. And because of that, they also had anxieties. Don't forget that 6 and 7 come together. They had anxieties about the future. They had anxieties about what would happen to them. And the way some people tend to react to the anxiety is not in the right way. It's not in the right way. And so, though they were down with the anxiety, they can even be brought further down through the wrong reactions. And the wrong reactions are, basically, it's an expression of pride. That is, I am going to react the way I want to react. I'm going to react the way by reacting the way I want to react, I will not be reacting the way God wants to react. And therefore, I make myself to be God instead of him. In other words, I am displaying pride. God understands the situation that you're in. But that's why he gives you a lot of resources to understand that he knows your suffering, but he also explains your suffering. And there have been many of those things. You are participating in Christ's suffering. And so on account of that, he says, no, don't repay evil with evil. I see the condition that you're in, but I will support you, explain, and strengthen you so that you respond in the way I want you to respond. But if you go about responding the way you want to respond, then you show yourself to be proud. Yes, you have anxieties, but the fact that you have anxieties is not an occasion to then rebel against me. Now, those who rebel against me, those who are proud, because they try to lift themselves up, they would see that the way I would react to them is that I would oppose them. I would now become an adversary towards them. That person is really down. They thought they couldn't go further down, but actually they can go further down. But there's another kind of person. That person is the one who humbles themselves under God's mighty hand. And the funny thing is that even though they are under God's hand, it's not the hand to press them down. It's the hand that, despite that they're showing their humility under God always leads to a rising up. And so they are refreshed in their suffering. They have hope towards the future. They have no fear of the future. Don't forget that the condition he describes them in is more from their psychological state. They are anxious. And so the deliverance they get is within the anxiety. They are lifted up out of that psychological debilitating state. They are now by being given more spiritual enlightenment and being given spiritual power, they are able to see reality in a way that God is with them, and therefore they don't have to react in retaliation. What they can do is to react in love, is to continue to follow God, and in that way they stand tall. Now, could that even find application in terms of finances? Maybe in some way. Maybe some people are going through extremely difficult financial situations, and they decide they want to take a road that God has not chosen for them. God can be a resistance towards them. But some people decide they want to stick with God's plans. They decide not to follow in the ways that others are offering them to give them financial prosperity, because they've decided money is not my God. And in some instances, God decides to reward them even here with repairing and actually restoring their financial situations. Now, notice how I've expressed it. The difference between this and what some people call prosperity theology is that prosperity theology guarantees it. And so it makes this particular passage all about the money. So if you are in or the health or the wealth, if you are in a financially difficult situation, as long as you humble yourself under God's mighty hand, you will get a financial reward, guaranteed. But you see, that makes God not a central player. It makes him a peripheral player. The money is the real God. So even the humility you try to express is not sincere humility. It's humility that is pragmatic. You are trying to get something. And in that regard, that would be totally wrong to the spirit of this. But also, I do want to say, for those of us who want to avoid prosperity theology at all costs, and I am one of those, that doesn't mean that God doesn't financially prosper us. That doesn't mean that when we follow after God's ways, that sometimes he doesn't reward us in that immediate sense. We understand what the guaranteed reward of God is. It is eternal. But that doesn't mean, as a foretaste of what he's going to give us eternally, that sometimes he doesn't even show us, rewards in things that matter to us, things that are good in this world. I hope that clarifies that for you, Demola. Okay, let's go. If there's any other one, question 2, Demola again. Hadiza, thanks for the clarification. Demola, I'm not used to addressing people in authority by their first names, especially not in church. Why do you do this in City Church? Sincerely curious, because it's weird in our cultural context. Demola, can I first say to you that you are not the first person asking that question. That question has been asked for as long as we've existed. Can I drink some water? Well, first of all, I should say there are people that would address me. My parents come to this church. Although my parents like to call me their lead. They say, our lead pastor. And I say, our mama ati baba lead pastor, But of course, they're still going to call me by my name. I think here, and Demola, thanks for asking the question, and I do know that there are still some people in church here that struggle with this. The way I've tried to say this is, can I come back to the gospel, that we're gospel-centered urban church? Now, one of the things, the beautiful things you see about the gospel in Ephesians chapter 2, but you also see this in Galatians 3:28, and all, it's all over, is that the gospel, if you make the gospel the central thing in your church, as it should be, then you are able to unite a group of diverse people. And the diversity is always our diversity is always expressed by certain categories. So, for instance, the explicit mention of, the explicit division in Galatians chapter 2, which is the main one that comes throughout the Bible, is an ethnic, but it's a redemptive ethnic division. That is Jews and Gentiles. I say it's redemptive, it's ethnic, but it's redemptive ethnic, because that division is unique in that The Jews were the bearers of the promise, Abraham's promise, and to save the whole world. And if you are not a Jew, you are a Gentile. But we can apply that to non-redemptive ethnic divisions like Yoruba, Igbo, Hausa, Nupe, Edo, Ishekiri, Ejo. We're all diverse, but oftentimes the diversity leads to division. What does the gospel do? The gospel does not make our ethnicity the central uniting point. If your gospel if your message unites you through your ethnicity, then those outside of that can never feel comfortable. So I hope City Church, for instance, is not a Yoruba church. We are really diverse ethnically, as much as you can see in Lagos. But also, the gospel can unite people across generational lines. So like in church now, thank God we're increasingly getting seniors in our church. By seniors, I mean people over 60. We have somebody over 80. But also, we have people in their 20s. And then we have a lot of people in their 30s, and we have a lot of people in their 40s. I think we're probably a church whose average age is somewhere around 34, 35, 36. So again, it unites us around the gospel. And there are other categories. But here's the thing, though. When we come from those different backgrounds, because the gospel unites us, that doesn't mean that some of the expressions of those diversity doesn't come. And oftentimes they come, it's not like we just celebrate it and we're all just so happy. No, they come with clashes. So I'll give you another example. I think there's a generational thing that has to do with not calling people by their names. There is a generational thing. It's not always totally clear. But I find that a lot of the people from their late 30s to their early 40s and close to 50s they hardly would refer to me by name. They hardly refer to me by name. There is a certain understanding that a lot of them grew up with about spiritual authority. They don't worship me. These people, and probably you are also in that category, Demola. It's not about worship. It's about an understanding of what spiritual authority means. And so it's reflected in the title. And I appreciate that. In fact, at first I was a bit iffy about that just because of some of the background I had. And eventually I got to understand that. And so I embraced it. But there are some people who actually have grown up in a more casual sense. And in fact, a lot of their generation haven't seen the abuse of spiritual authority in the generations just before them. They are very, very iffy when it comes to church leadership and all of those. And a way of expressing that is to call church leaders by their first names. But they are in church. Then there are some people, another division I see is, if, for instance, you've had some time, some extended period growing or schooling or working in the West, and then you came back to Nigeria, more often than not, and this was part of my thing with my wife and I, maybe that's why we initially really were comfortable with anybody calling me by the name, is that I've had pastors and we always refer to them by first names. I mean, my pastor before I came back here was old enough to be my dad. But everyone called by their first names. And so sometimes there is a cultural division. And some other people who probably grown up and stayed in Nigeria most of their lives, we're still used to that. Another one that brings this thing is, I would say, it's also cultural, but it has to do with vocation, cultural context. Some people, right from their entry level, have been part of a vocational work culture where maybe it's an international organization. And so because it's an international organization, they're trying to create a unified culture across all boards. They call people by their first names. So if you have been there for 10 years, you see even the people in authority, your CEO is still called by the first name. And so they just bring that to church. That's just the way they've been grown. And some other people actually know in the context of their work, authority and expressed through not calling those people by their name is such a big thing. Now notice, I don't think you make a total moral judgment on either of these. I do think the moral judgment comes from respect. The Bible is so clear about how you treat spiritual authority. Respect, submission. To the healthy ones, if you are not in a place where it's healthy, I don't think the issue, what you do is start to disrespect them. I think what you do is that you leave. But where you have decided to submit and commit yourself, respect. Now, but what you have seen, the way I have spoken about, is that respect can be communicated through different cultural norms. You cannot say because people who have stayed in the West are not used to expressing respect in the cultural norm that you have adopted, that they are wrong. What you look out for is whether or not they do show that respect. That's what I would say to the people who want the title. I would say to the people who don't want titles, sometimes it is good for you to be able to say, I have the right to do this particular thing, but I wouldn't do it. Why? Because I'm seeing that it makes that person uncomfortable. And so maybe you're a 28-year-old and you're talking to a 47-year-old who keeps saying Pastor Femi, and then you keep saying Femi. There's an awkwardness that keeps coming in that conversation. And so you may say, you know what, I have the right to say Femi. No, but there's no one legislating in this church that you mustn't. But because I feel that this my 47-year-old older brother or older sister, it makes him uncomfortable. So as Paul says in 1 Corinthians chapter 9, though I have the right to do something, it doesn't always mean that I would exercise that right. I would actually lay it down for the sake of my brother or my sister. And this is the tension, Demola, quite frankly, myself and the leadership have decided to take on this thing. Because if we go down the road of saying, you must call all the leaders by a title, then we're institutions. I would say that's a form of legalism, because that isn't what the Bible has commanded. And what we are then legislating is a cultural norm. We are not legislating a biblical command. And so we have to respect the diversity and keep the gospel at the center. But at the same time, I do want to push people to also think about their brothers and sisters. To say, okay, if this makes this person uncomfortable, if this, and to also agree that I think the one I'll be less comfortable with is if any of us who are in the 30s or 40s and below goes and sees a 60-something-year-old and then calls them by their first name. I would say, no, hold on. The respect there and the cultural norm of calling people that are way older by titles, that one is so much more tied that I think to violate that, you will not only be making those people you are calling by names uncomfortable, you're making almost everyone uncomfortable around you. So that would I'll take an exception. But in the issue, at least in this church, in the issue of the spiritual authority, there is some level of diversity there. And I do think what we need to give each other is charity and the space to do that. So Demola, I've taken time to answer this question because honestly, you are not the only person that has expressed this thing. And I do want to explain why we're taking this almost is not some people would just want a clear answer. Just tell us whether we should call you by name or we shouldn't. I'm sorry if you're that kind of person that have disappointed you. What I would say is, if you're the kind of person that is used to calling titles, you can do that, but also understand the diversity that is there. Let the gospel be at the center. If you're the kind of person who isn't used to it, consider your brother and your sister who you may be offending and see how and where appropriately you can decide to lay down your right. Okay? But both camps, because it's possible to use the title and not show respect. And it's also possible to, through not using the title, this is how the disrespect comes. Both camps should try as much as possible to follow the biblical mandate to give respect to spiritual authority in the church. I hope that helps. All right. Let me see. T. Judah, what about if the 20-year-old is also is also it's also uncomfortable. If the 20, well, if the first of all, I hope you're not saying 20. Like first of all, I don't want my children. As I'm trying to teach my children something, they should, and they're uncomfortable about it, I would say, well, you are still within a certain age. So whether you're uncomfortable about it or not, there's much you don't know. So if a 20-year-old or younger is feeling uncomfortable because they're being told something to do, I expect that person to still be somewhat under the authority of their parents. But if you say the 20-something-year-old is uncomfortable, well, that's why I'm saying that there has to be charity both ways. But I am calling the 20-something-year-old to sometimes acknowledge that a 40-something-year-old has more experience and has lived more life. And so there's a certain level of humility you should show to people who are older than you. I do think 1 Timothy 5, for instance, makes a case that, like when Paul is telling Timothy how to treat the older ladies and the older men who have actually done what is wrong, he actually tells him to treat them differently than he would the younger ones. And so I do think there's something that they're saying, where there's an added level of humility that is required from those who are younger in trying to learn and seek wisdom from those who are older. This isn't to say that those who are older always know what's right, no. But I'm saying that age does matter. And so I will push the younger ones to try to, where legitimate, they should try to be more humble in trying to submit their discomfort more to the Lord. I'm not saying they should totally always. I'm not saying that sometimes when the older person is not correct, that they shouldn't find ways of seeking a pushback. Important thing is we all need to love and respect one another. One of the things I've often tried to push is that the fact that someone is older than I am doesn't mean that I don't deserve respect. I deserve respect as a human being created in the image of God. First and foremost, I deserve the respect within the community of the saints. I deserve respect based on the fact that the same spirit that is in you is also in me. But at the same time, we move from that. If I'm older than someone, I deserve a certain kind of respect because I am older than them. If I have spiritual authority over some people, I deserve a certain level of respect based on these other special categories. But I don't want people to hear that to then say, based on that, deserving respect means you must always agree with me. So, there's a level to which I can't speak into all the different scenarios that comes up as a result of this thing. I can speak to broad principles. Love, respect, humility. Those things are really will help us. Okay. Taiwo also says, the 60-year-old may be comfortable with younger people calling them by their names. And if that's the case, that 60-year-old should be happy, should let them know that you can call them by their name. But don't force people. Like at one point I almost tried to try and force people to just call me Femi. I decided to lay down my own discomfort to embrace why they were doing that. And now I can understand. And in fact, in some places I would say, yeah, it's probably important that some people do that. And then, should we be observant and adapt as we deem fit because not everyone follows the norms? Yeah, I think I've answered that. Shouldn't we also believe the best of people and not take offense easily? Yes, to the older ones, thank you, Taiwo, for bringing that. To the older ones, that's another thing. Whilst I've pushed for the younger ones to be more humble, to decide to lay down their freedoms, to the older one, don't take offense easily. There's the theologian that has affected me the most, Don Carson, said his father, towards the end of his life, said he used to pray this prayer. He says, God, deliver me from the sin of old men. And what he meant by that was the sin of bitterness. And the sin of bitterness that older people are usually characterized with is that they always look down on younger people. They get easily offended. As a Yoruba guy growing up, I would often see with uncles and aunts and, extended family, you go to a place, they are just waiting for that person that didn't greet them well. First of all, if you didn't greet them, Kimini, Rimini, you didn't see me, Kimi. Then there's the one of, Kimi Dada, you didn't greet me well. It's like, the person knelt down small. The knees didn't touch the floor. Look at the way they looked at me. Do you get, it's just easy offense. That is the sin of old people. And so you think this person actually disrespected you because they called you by name. No, believe the best. Because when you believe the best of them, even when you do want to correct them, it will come with sincere love. Okay. I do want to end on that, okay? All right, Demola, thank you for acknowledging that it works. Okay. Antawa, I hope I've answered about the accommodation going both ways. I would like to ask if we are a tithing church. By tithing, I mean conventional once a month 10% giving, or it's just expected in terms of general giving over the course of the month or year or what have you. I ask this because in line with your income statement. Thank you. From Toby, that's on WhatsApp. Toby, it's a nice question, and I'm going to give you a sort of more complicated answer. Now, it depends on what you mean by tithing, Toby, and I'm sorry that I can't answer, because it's very easy for me to just say, no, we're not a tithing church. But I found out that when some people hear that, they actually misunderstand what we mean by we're not a tithing church. And then I can then say, yes, we're a tithing church. But then again, some people have so many things, and this issue is such a combustible issue in the Nigerian church, that I think some people will hear something else. And so, even though we've preached about this, and you can refer to some of the messages we preached, the last one I remember was something called the command to generosity. It was under the Idols in the City series, the command to generosity, Idols in the City series. There's also the cheerful givers. Cheerful givers. I'm sure all of these sermons will be posted in the link below. The links to these sermons will be posted in the description box. Cheerful givers, which is under the Gospel-Centered Urban Church series. The Gospel-Centered Urban Church series. And then we had Gospel Generosity 1 and 2, and that is within the... I've forgotten the name of that series. I don't even know whether... This is one of our earliest messages. I've forgotten what the title of it was. Maybe Gospel... It's called the Gospel series or something like that, towards the end. But the links to that will have been they will have been placed in the description box. Anyway, so that's why I can't just give a straight answer because it can be confusing. So if by tithing you mean that we are mandated by the Bible to give towards the church that we are part of, we are mandated, and that mandate requires us to specify an amount that we regularly give in line with the income that we receive, that is, a percentage of the income that we get. As covenant generosity, that is regular generosity towards the church. And by the church, I'm sorry to say this because I think some people misunderstand that. I don't mean towards the mercy arm of the church. No, I'm just saying to the church. If by that, a mandate that we get from the Bible to take a percentage in line with the income that we receive to give towards the church on a regular basis, and that percentage you could decide to be 10%. If by that, it could be 10% or not. If by that you mean tithing, are we a tithing church? I'll say yes, that we're a tithing church based on that definition. But once you flip that definition to mean, it is mandated that you give 10%. Everybody must give 10%. Then we are not a tithing church. Okay? Now, so what we believe is apart from other avenues that you can give to other places, and even to other things within the church, you are mandated to give a percentage of your income, a generous percentage of your income, that ultimately does not put you and your family in poverty, and that you can't eat, or you can't just do basic things. And I think, as I said, Galatians 6:6, 1 Corinthians 9:11, 13, and 14 would form a basis of this, even though there are other scriptures that I could mention. But the idea is this, that the church comes together and the church has a commonwealth. because the Holy Spirit gives the church members gifts that are part of this body. And these gifts form the commonwealth. And these gifts actually are spiritual, they're socioeconomic. So they're spiritual in that there are things that we would not be able to do unless the Holy Spirit was in us. There are things that just natural talent doesn't do. But they are social in that we actually give of our kindness, we give of our encouragement, we give of the things that we have. You can only give what you have. So you give those things, the relational aspect of our lives. Is economic in that it is financial as well. We give of our resources. But also there's probably another category I'm missing there. But these are what form so our talents as well. So maybe you're a singer, maybe your intellectual knowledge and all of those things. So we bring those things together, and that forms that this church has a commonwealth. It's common because we share it among each other. And this enables us to grow. And the reason we share is because of love. So Paul describes in 1 Corinthians 12 the gifts and then the body of Christ. But then in 1 Corinthians 13, he shows that the reason we share the things we share is because we love one another. And so you see that love one another throughout the New Testament. Okay, but even in the Old Testament community, it was meant to be based on love because the greatest commandment was to love God and then to love your neighbor. Okay, so it's on that basis then it now says, all right, there are those who actually are on the front line of serving just spiritually. There are people who serve spiritually. Paul says that there are those who live by the gospel, because what they do is to do the works, the gospel work. Their vocation is tied towards ministry. That's their main vocation. So that's what they strive in. They really, if they have to do that thing well, they can't then give themselves to other things that probably could have made them money easily. But then there are those who, though would do gospel work, is not tied to their vocation. So their main vocation is to go outside of ministry and to do the work. So you see now, the people who are then part of this church, or a church, are dependent on those who give themselves towards ministry so that they can be fed spiritually. So that there are songs that can be sung that lift them up. There's content that is being developed, not just on Sunday, but throughout the week that can help them, that can help their children. There are programs that are put in for them to live out the mission of God, without which those who work will not be able to actually live out the mission of God well. So these guys do these things, they develop these things that make it easier for you to serve and obey the commandments of God to be part of his mission. All right. So you are dependent on them spiritually. Well, Paul then says in Galatians 6, if you are reaping from them spiritually, then they also should be dependent on you financially. So you see, you are bringing your wealth, they are bringing their wealth, and there is a commonwealth. Now, for that to be done sustainably, Paul says, okay, if they regularly have to bring about spiritual food, regularly, and by regularly means there's a fixed thing. You meet every Sunday. That is fixed. And whether they feel like doing it or not, on the one hand, they're inspired by the gospel, but on the other hand, it's their job. On the other hand, too, also, financially, you also commit to them, whether you feel it or not. And that's why we say regularly, because not only are they serving you regularly on a fixed schedule, you also receive an income regularly on a fixed schedule. You don't tell the school that your children go to that, I don't feel like giving today. I don't feel like paying their fees. No. And so that's why it's a covenant generosity. It's fixed, right? And the church, now the Bible also calls us to be generous beyond that. We should give spontaneously as well. So that's the basis upon which we do that. Why we don't go and say it must be 10% is because we don't think the Bible teaches that it must be 10% for the New Testament believer. We don't think that. And that gives an enormous freedom, because then for people that find themselves in very difficult situation, where they are unable to give 10%, it gives them the freedom not to do so, but hopefully cause them to still show generosity. But for people who are able to give above 10%, it gives them the freedom to do so as well. And so I do think you specify, but I don't think the specification is commanded. The actual amount, the specification is commanded. And so that's what I would say towards that.